Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking all about pasta. This is one of the things that you've told me you find the most challenging to shoot. So today we're going to go through some tips for composing, styling, lighting and shooting pasta. I've got a free composition planning kit linked down below, which we're going to be using during the video. So make sure you go grab your copy now so you can follow along with me. Let's jump in. So one of the things that makes shooting pasta so challenging is that it's just a very brown food. In order to kind of give myself a challenge and also give you the best tips, today we are going to be shooting cacio e pepe, which is basically cheese and pepper with pasta. It's so brown, everything is brown. There's nothing to hide behind, so it's going to be a really good example of how to make something very, very plain look delicious. The first tips that I have for you for shooting pasta, it all starts with the cooking. So when you're cooking pasta to shoot, you're not going to cook it exactly how you would cook it to eat. Almost, but not quite. You want to make sure that your pasta is just a little bit under al dente. We all want to eat that beautiful al dente pasta that's got a little bit of bite, but when you shoot it, that even can be a little bit too soft. So for this recipe, I cooked this really, really thick pasta in a lot of boiling water with some salt while I prepared the sauce. Now, this isn't the kind of pasta where I could use this trick, but depending on the dish you're shooting, if you don't have to mix the pasta with the sauce as part of the cooking process, once your pasta is done, you can drain it directly into a bowl of ice cold water to stop that cooking process, and then add just a little bit of oil once you've drained it, and that's just going to stop it from sticking together. In this case, my pasta goes right in with my sauce, so I didn't do that. So instead, I just cooked it a little bit under so that when everything was mixed, it didn't go, too smushy. For the sauce, I also made this just a tiny bit thinner than I normally would, just so that it really glossed over the pasta. With this recipe in particular, the sauce is just made with pecorino cheese, pepper, and the starchy pasta cooking water, and that kind of all comes together into this really lovely creamy sauce. But as it cools down, that cheese does start to harden. So just to give myself a little bit more time, I added just a little bit more water to the sauce than I normally would. And this just allowed me to keep the recipe nice and silky and keep the pasta looking nice and shiny. So the next thing that you want to think about is your story. Who are you talking to? This is going to really help you determine what kind of style of image to shoot. If you're shooting something for a takeaway menu versus something that's going to go on a food blog or in a magazine, the style and the way you shoot it is going to be completely different. So make sure you've got a really clear idea who you're talking to when you're thinking about your shoot. So for this recipe, I thought more about doing an editorial style. So I want to create a collection of images that can all go together to complement each other and ultimately sit together as part of a story. So this is not really something that I would use for a menu or a restaurant or something like that, but much more for a cookbook or a magazine or a food blog. So I want to make sure that the viewer can connect with this image in a way that makes them feel like, oh yeah, I could sit down and eat that, not something that they think, oh yeah, I want to order that. Just bear that in mind when you're thinking about your story. The next thing to think about when you're shooting a brown food like pasta is the colors that you're going to use. So obviously the color of pasta itself, very brown, very boring, very difficult to make pop. So think about what else you can bring into your scene to help that along. When we think about color theory and the colors that go with brown, we've got colors like blue, which is a dyadic color to brown. We've got pink and purple, which are complementary. They sit on the opposite side of the color wheel. And then we've got analogous colors like green and red. So you can really think about when you're choosing your background and your props, which kind of color combinations might work well. For this shoot today, I've chosen to go with a bright red backdrop, which is something very bold and a little bit different. I asked you guys in my community tab which backdrop you liked best when I was doing my test shoots, and you all voted for the red one. That is what we're gonna do today. So this backdrop is very red. It is kind of becoming a bit of a feature of the image, but I love that because the pasta is very bright. So this is gonna bring in some contrast and some color. In terms of props, I did a test shoot as well, trying out some darker and lighter props. And in the end, I felt like the pasta worked well in a light colored bowl, but then I wanted to use some complementary supporting props. So I'm actually including some darker plates and little bowls for the supporting elements in the dish. I'm gonna have a little bowl on the side with some peppercorns and also a plate with some cheese and sort of the little grater. And I think just the combination of the dark with the light bowl, it really makes the pasta stand out. Next up is lighting. So the lighting that you use is going to completely change the mood of your whole image. So for this image, I've chosen to go with a really hard light. That pasta, again, like I've said, it's very plain, it's very white. With a soft light, I just felt like all that detail is going to get a bit lost, and actually a hard light was going to work a lot better. So I used my Godox AD600 Pro with the reflector head attached. That's really going to help push that light forward and create really hard shadows. I positioned this pretty high above the scene at a bit of an angle so that my shadows weren't completely straight. And then I added a fill light just to lift some of the shadows on the opposite side. I didn't want the shadows to be too light because I still wanted that really nice dramatic contrast, but I also didn't want them to be completely dark where you're actually losing a lot of detail. So I ended up using my 70 by 100 centimeter softbox just to lift those shadows a little bit. So just remember, when you're choosing a modifier for your light, if you're shooting with artificial light, the bigger the light source, the softer the light is going to be, and the smaller the light source, the harder the light is going to be. I do have a video all about this, which I'll link at the top. If you want to see more about choosing the right modifier for a different style of light, then go check that out. So for this editorial shoot, I want to make sure that I'm mixing up the angles that I'm using and not just using the same angle for every single image. So I'm going to use a top-down angle for the main shot, so a flat lay, but then I'm also going to throw in a 45-degree angle shot for a bit of action. So in the shot list that I've made, we're going to do a flat lay shot, which will be our main shot. So that's going to be a little bit of a kind of medium shot. I'm going to use my 55mm lens for this, looking straight down at the pasta and all the props so you can see everything because all the detail is going on the top. Then we're going to do a macro top-down shot of the spaghetti. So I want to get really up close and into those like nice spaghetti swirls. And then the last shot that I want to do is a 45-degree angle straight on shot with a bit of an action of some cheese coming down. And I think that's just going to really add to this story that really the focus of this recipe is the pecorino cheese. So we want to see lots of cheese. So for each of these shots, I used my printable composition planning kits, which you can download for free down below so you can plan along with me for your own shot. I used the Golden Triangle composition kit, and what I do is I sketch out sort of a rough idea of my shot before I start to shoot. And I like to include quite a lot of detail in this. So as well as the main sort of position of my props and everything, I will also kind of make notes about the direction of the light, any styling decisions I might want to make that I might forget in the moment on set, but I might have an idea for. The way I do this is to focus on the intersections of the lines. So on any composition grid that you're using, where the lines meet, those are the strongest points of the composition. So in the flat lay shot, I'm going to be using the bottom right intersection to place the main plate, and then I'm going to be using those diagonal lines to help me place all the other props and supporting elements. So you can really be as detailed or as abstract as you want in these sketches, but it really does help to walk into your shoot with a bit of a vision of what you're trying to create. So I just like to walk in not with a blank canvas, and then I can also pair that composition grid with an overlay in Capture One to help me execute what I've planned. You definitely don't need to be an artist to do this. This is not about drawing out a perfect Da Vinci level sketch of your your image on a piece of paper, but it's just to give yourself an idea of what you're going for when you walk in. Okay, so next up is the plating. So when it comes to plating pasta, there are a few techniques that are better than just dumping it on a plate and hoping for the best. It rarely looks good if you just put it straight from the pan. It's going to be a bit messy and you just might not get the best view of everything. So there's kind of two extremes. There's that, and then there's also the other extreme where we kind of twirl every single piece individually, and that can work. And if you have the time and the patience to do that, and that's the look you're going for, absolutely do it. But I like to personally go for something a bit in between, because I like my food to look nice and styled, but not over styled. So what I like to do with pasta, particularly spaghetti, is to fill about the bottom third of the plate with pasta just straight away and give it kind of a rough style. So to do this, you could either use a fork or culinary tweezers and just kind of get in there and create a bit of a basic shape. So at this point, I'm just trying to make sure that there's no big gaps, everything sort of looks nice and evenly covered, there's no sort of wacky strands poking out anywhere, and I've got a nice base. Then what I like to do is create a few little nests by hand. So to do this, I take about 5 strands of spaghetti and lay them over my finger, making sure that they're sort of all in line with each other. And then I wrap them around one finger and then place that little nest onto my plate. And then you can kind of play with it, use the culinary tweezers to poke bits in or separate it, change the shape a little bit, but really that's going to help you give a nice styled look to the top without having to do that for the entire plate, which personally I find just looks a little bit too perfect. Then after this, I like to think about any garnishes or anything that you might add on top. So if you've got a pasta dish where you've got solid things in the sauce, like maybe some vegetables or some prawns or anything, this would be the time, once you've done that initial plating, to maybe just go through and add a few little extra pieces onto the plate so it looks natural, but it looks like you've got a nice even spread of those ingredients. Sometimes they can get a bit lost when you're plating things up, and that's a really good way to make sure that you can see the best of everything. In this case, the only ingredients I have are pepper and cheese. So all I'm gonna do is add a little bit of extra cheese on top and some extra pepper. And I'm not gonna overdo it because I don't want to overwhelm the top and cover up all that lovely styling that we just did. But I do want it to look ready to be served, and just a little bit of extra pepper and a few cheese strands are a really good way to do that. Okay, so for the shoot of this top-down image, I had my Godox AD600 Pro positioned pretty high above the scene at an angle coming in so that my shadows weren't completely straight. I had the light quite far away from the scene to help with avoiding glare on the backdrop. In the beginning, we did a few test shoots and found that when the light was a bit further away, it stopped that kind of bright spot on this vinyl backdrop. This backdrop is from V-Flat World, and I really love how rich the color is, but they are just a little bit shiny. So having the light a little bit further away helped with that. So once we brought in the pasta, did a few sort of final touch-ups, I played around with the position of my supporting props. And I knew I wanted to have a few extra bits of food. So I wanted to have the cheese wedge and the little grater. So I played around with the position of that, making sure that I was using the golden triangle composition grid to help me position those. So I was really using those bisectional and intersectional lines to help place those, and I played around with that a little bit. And then also I wanted to have a few little peppercorns on the scene. But initially when I put them on, they were kind of sitting in the shadow that was made by the bowl of peppercorns. So I moved them out of that shadow just so you could really see them a bit more. And I think that made a really big difference. Like I mentioned, you can watch the full live behind the scenes shoot in Food Photography Academy, which I'll link down below, as well as the complete walkthrough of this image, which was one of the supporting images we did. In this one, I really focused on capturing that action. So we had to do a little bit of adjustment to the flash settings and everything. And I walk you through exactly step by step what I did live on set in that video. So those are some of my favorite tips for styling and shooting pasta. Don't forget to download your printable composition planning kit down below. This is so useful for walking into your shoot, and you can follow along step by step with me with your own copy. Don't forget to check out Food Photography Academy, and I will see you in the next video.